Boris Johnson has been speaking about Russia's actions in the Ukraine. So just quick look at this. It's about 1 minute long.
I'm afraid that that is what the evidence points to, Sophie, and there's no burnishing it, there's no hiding it. The fact is that all the signs are that the plan has already, in some senses, begun. That's what our American friends think, and you're seeing these provocations now in Donbass. You're starting to see this, these explosions and so on that we've been warning about for a long time. And I'm afraid to say that the plan that we're seeing is for something that could be really the biggest war in Europe since 1945, in terms of sheer scale. You're looking at not just an invasion through the east, through the Donbass, but according to the intelligence that we're seeing, coming down from the north, down from Belarus, and actually encircling Kiev itself, as Joe Biden explained to a lot of us last night.
What an interesting phrase, eh? Coming down from the north. That's what we'd expect, isn't it, from the King of the North? And the King of the North is clearly preparing herself for the actions that we expect to see in the coming days, weeks, months, years, when she'll eventually drop down into the territory further south of Ukraine, into Turkey, and then on into the land of Israel. Now, while we're in our Monday night class this evening, President Putin is giving a speech to the Russian nation. So right now, Putin is speaking. It's slightly unfortunate. It'd be helpful if it was a couple of hours ago, because we could have picked up some of the headlines. But needless to say, just a few moments ago, Putin has said, Ukraine was created by Russia. He began his speech discussing history, saying that modern Ukraine was created by Russia. All right. So the BBC analysis says this. Putin opened his address to the nation by discussing his view on history and why, from his perspective, Ukraine simply isn't a state. It was an ominous start. He's still talking, and now is almost like the Russian leader is making a bid to run for president of Ukraine. He's talking about water prices and utilities going up, unemployment, poverty and corruption. So remarkable, isn't it, that as we are giving our class tonight, the Russian president is giving his class to the Russian nation, and he's telling the world he doesn't see Ukraine as a state. Ukraine was created by Russia, and he's speaking candidly about the issues and challenges that Ukraine have currently got in terms of water prices, utilities, no doubt oil and gas, which he's in control of, unemployment, poverty and corruption, and so on. And of course, he's saying, listen to the people, listen, look to me. Don't worry about your president. Look to me. I'll provide the solution to your problems. I am the King of the North. So that's happening right now as we speak. Now, the part of his speech, he's making clear what the world expected him to do today, which was he's recognized the eastern Ukrainian territories of Donetsk and Luhansk as separatist territories. They're breakaway territories. And he says he sees them as independent states. He's already issued thousands of Russian passports to people living in those areas. And of course, what the world is petrified of, what the European Union, the United Nations, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, they're all worried, aren't they, that what's going to happen now is that Russia is going to go into this region and say, we're coming here to protect the citizens of Donetsk, of Luhansk. We don't need Ukraine's permission to go in here. We see these as independent areas, just like Crimea. And so, of course, we're entitled to come into this region. And now he's going to be able to perhaps launch a full-scale military operation against the rest of Ukraine, and particularly the capital of Kiev. Now, I read a really interesting article this last week, and Sister Hannah Dawson-Bowman very kindly sent me some notes on the Kievan Rus, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. But having had those notes from Hannah, I sort of did a bit more digging, and I found a really interesting article, which is put on the screen there under Smart History, where a doctor looking at these events and looking at the history of the Kievan Rus, not just recently, in the last few years, discusses how the Kievan Rus is linked to the Byzantine Empire. Now, it's a long article, and we're not going to go through it all, but I want to just share a few. The next few slides are just going to pick up on this article. So Kievan Rus emerged as a powerful confederation of city-states during the second half of the 9th century, so about 1,000 years ago, in Eastern Europe, where rivers helped link the Baltic Sea with the Black Sea and facilitated trade with Constantinople, the wealthy capital of the Byzantine Empire. Now, obviously, as Christadelphians and Bible students, this is of interest because you'll know that the Byzantine Empire was the Eastern Roman Empire, wasn't it? That was the empire when think of Nebuchadnezzar's image and the legs split in two, the legs of iron. The Western image, the Western Empire had its capital in Rome, and the Eastern Empire, the Byzantine Empire, had its capital in Constantinople. So the capital of Kievan Rus was Kiev on the Dnieper River, which is today the capital of Ukraine. The name Kievan Rus refers both to the state and its people. Kievan Rus was sometimes a trading partner and other times an enemy of the Byzantine Empire. But in 987, Prince Vladimir I of Kiev, ruler over the Kievan Rus, formed an alliance with the Byzantine Emperor Basil II, converting from paganism to Christianity and marrying Basil II's sister Anna in 988. Historical texts describe the subsequent conversion of Vladimir's formerly pagan subjects by mass baptism in the Dnieper River in Kiev. With its conversion to the Orthodox Christianity of the Byzantines, the Kievan Rus now began appropriating and adapting Byzantine art and architecture for itself. Now, Dr. Evan Freeman, the guy who wrote this article, in his article, which you can see online, goes through umpteen examples of the appropriation of the Byzantine culture into the Kievan Rus. In the middle of the 13th century, he goes on to say, Kiev and many of its former territories fell to the Mongol invaders, bringing an end to the Kievan Rus. But after 2 centuries of Mongol rule in the region, the city of Moscow emerged as a new center of power. Moscow was a latecomer among the older cities of Kievan Rus, emerging in the 12th century and gaining wealth and power in the 14th and 15th centuries. The Grand Duke of Moscow, Ivan III or Ivan the Great, achieved independence from the Mongols around 1480 and established Moscow as the center of what now became known as Russia. But as Moscow ascended, the Byzantine Empire declined. But Constantinople, today Istanbul, fell to the Ottomans in 1453. Now, those of us who've been looking at these classes for some time, we've looked at that history. And so we're not surprised that ended the long history of the Eastern Roman Empire that begun when Emperor Constantine dedicated the capital city of Constantinople in 330, which he also referred to as New Rome. In the years that followed, Moscow increasingly viewed itself as successor to Byzantium and even began referring to itself as the Third Rome. In 1472, Ivan III married Sophia, something else, I can't read that on the screen there, apologies, niece of the last Byzantine emperor, symbolically cementing the continuation of Byzantium in Russia. In Moscow, Russia, the 2016 unveiling of a statue of the 10th century Prince Vladimir I of Kiev caused international consternation. Located in the shadow of the Kremlin, Russia's center of government, the statue of Prince Vladimir towers over Moscow at nearly 60 feet tall. Not as tall, by the way, as the image in Daniel chapter 3 that Nebuchadnezzar set up for himself. That was 90 feet tall, but all the same, 60 feet tall. Vladimir holds a monumental cross with his right hand, while his left hand clutches a large sword. To many, Moscow's menacing new Prince Vladimir statue appears as a thinly veiled reference to the very similar 19th century statue of Prince Vladimir that stands on the banks of the Dnieper River in Kiev, Ukraine, the site of the baptism of the Kievan Rus into the Christianity of the Byzantines in the 10th century. The timing of Moscow's installation of the new statue of Prince Vladimir in 2016 was also significant. It coincided with Russia's recent annexation of Crimea. This article was written just 2 or 3 years ago, and ongoing armed conflict with Ukraine. By installing the new statue of Prince Vladimir in its capital, Russia seemed to lay claim to the historical legacy and perhaps even the former territories of the Kievan Rus. And so in Kiev today, on the right-hand side of your screen there, you see a monument to Prince Vladimir I overlooking the river in which the Kievan Rus converted to Christianity and took on much of the cultural heritage of the Byzantine Empire, which then passed to Moscow, the Third Rome. And so that monument to Prince Vladimir I is of great significance. It was put there in 1853, but in just 2016, Putin put another monument, a 60-foot monument of Vladimir I in Moscow. And so this writer is making the point, without looking at Bible history, he's simply making the point that Russia, in putting that statue there, seemed to lay claim to the historical legacy and perhaps even the former territories of Kievan Rus, even while some of those territories are part of other states, such as Ukraine. And so for us, I appreciate we went through that at an enormous pace. You need to look at that now in your time. But the significance of the Kievan Rus shouldn't be lost on us. It clearly became the cultural stronghold of the Byzantine Empire. As the Byzantine Emperor collapsed and eventually completely collapsed in 1453. So this territory took on so much of what was the identity of the Byzantine Empire through their religion and their architecture and their art. And so culturally, it became of great significance. And so it's perhaps of no surprise to us that we see Vladimir Putin, before he's to drop south into Constantinople to take eventually the city of the Byzantine Empire, of Eastern Rome, he's taking the cultural stronghold of the Kievan Rus in Ukraine.